Welcome to Envizion More. Here, we dig deep into the insights of first-generation wealth builders, unearthing stories of passion, resilience, and relentless vision. Your host is Wayne Wagner Jr., founder of Visionary Wealth Management. So sit back and dig in. It's time to envision more.
Thanks for joining us on the Envizion More podcast. This is Wayne Wagner, president of Visionary Wealth Management. My co-host, Trent Booth, president of Veritas Leadership Group. We have a special episode today. A young guy who, I get to say young because he's so much younger than I am, but a guy I have enormous respect for, Brad Johnson, co-founder of Triad Partners, a super successful IMO, which we'll talk about what that stands for at a different time, but super successful business serving elite financial advisors across the country. So Brad, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Wayne. Excited to be here, man. I've been counting down the days for this one, so can't wait to see what we get into.
Good stuff. Trent, thank you for joining us again, as always. You've been quiet in the pregame here while we've been chatting a little bit. But
just really excited to connect. This has been circled on my calendar for a number of days as well. Brad and I have a lot of mutual friends that circles that have been intersecting with other people from Cutco specifically.
Yeah,
just listening through your podcast with Justin Donald the other day. In fact, even because I'm curious, the origin story for DBDL, Do Business, Do Life. Would you be open to sharing some of that here on our podcast as well? Because this has become a thing. I mean, I love that it's the name of your podcast, but I loved also the origin story behind it.
Yeah. You want to get into it now?
Let's go.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Deep end.
Yeah. So we got in. So Justin Donald, mutual friend. So he was on my podcast a few episodes back, Do Business, Do Life. But got to know Justin through a Front Row Dads, which is run by a guy named John Vroman. And there's a lot of Cutco mafia in there who have, grew up in Cutco and then kind of went off and did their own thing and built some really cool businesses. And Justin, I think, was at the second one, and we did a little panel. His was specifically kind of his family rhythms for the year and kind of how he calendared it out, his meetings with his wife, Jennifer, the intentionality between, how they raised their daughter. And after that, I just went up to Justin, who was basically a complete stranger other than me watching him on the panel. And I said, "Hey, Justin, I'm trying to be really intentional about being a better dad. Would you be down, every week, every 2 weeks, just a little, 15, 30-minute check-in call, just leveling up his dads?" And to his credit, he's like, "Yeah, let's do it." And so therein began a friendship. And so fast forward, probably 3-4 years later, I was just getting ready to leave my corporate job, the job that really got me into finance in the first place. And I'd had an incredible run there, almost a decade and a half, and working with independent financial advisors all across the country. And I just knew there was something more. It was kind of time for that next chapter for me. So I had just spent probably about a month and a half with just a lot of really tough conversations of, basically telling the advisors I'd grown up in the business with, "Hey, I'm leaving and I'm not really sure what I'm doing yet. But I just know it's time for that next chapter." And, the podcast, I'd been doing it back then and had really fallen in love with that. And so I thought I might go podcast for a couple of years. And I was just turning 40. So this was 2020. And, my wife and I were also just celebrating our 15th wedding anniversary. So my birthday's in August, our anniversary's in July. There was a sweet spot right in the middle. There's a beautiful property called Blackberry Farm. Are you guys familiar, just outside of Knoxville, Tennessee?
No, not bad. No.
Okay. Add it to your list.
Nice.
Imagine like the Ritz-Carlton dropped in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains, except instead of a room, you've got like a little cabin, rocking chair on the front porch, real fireplace, stack of firewood on the front porch, and just an incredible property. And so Sarah and I, my wife, were like, let's do a little couples getaway. And Justin and his wife, Jennifer, were on that. My business partner, Sean, and his wife, Aubrey, and one other couple we were friends with. So getting to the DBDL, I gave you a lot of lead up there. It was right in this season of life where one chapter was ending, another chapter was just getting ready to begin. And I knew I loved finance. I knew I loved relationships and working with advisors and entrepreneurs. And what I didn't know is what that would look like in the future. And so we went on a hike. It was a full day hike, beautiful through the forest. And Justin, Sean, and myself. It was kind of the girls kind of grouped up and they were hiking, and the guys, and of course, what the guys start talking about, like business, and because we geek out on that stuff. And it was a conversation around what we loved about what we had done and maybe some of the stuff that wasn't so fun. And I know, Wayne, we've had some similar conversations too. It's like, you want to build a business where you love working with the people that are your clients and that you serve, and who doesn't, and somewhere in there, the conversation came up, well, it'd be amazing. What an amazing life it could be if you just focused on doing business with people you wanted to do life with. And it was in the context of a larger conversation, but it was like, bam, there it is. Do business, do life. And it was just this integration. And that was the genesis of what later became the mission at Triad Partners. Sean was actually still working for a previous employer at that point. And so there was no like master plan, like we were even going to become business partners. And it was just the genesis of an idea that became our mission at Triad Partners and became the podcast. And honestly, a lot of fun.
And a clothing brand.
A lot of work and a lot of building over the last 3+ years, but it's been so rewarding. Quite the journey.
And a clothing brand today.
And a clothing brand. I didn't rock any today. I missed an opportunity, but
good stuff. I think that's dbdl.com is the website for that.
dbdl.com is right now, that's the clothing line. And then the podcast is bradleyjohnson.com. And then go out on any podcast player, you can find it, or YouTube.
Well, and what that's on this side of it, you went out to start Triad and looking to attract elite financial advisors, growth-minded advisors. And gosh, Brad, I mean, I have not had an experience with that community where I haven't walked away just refreshed, rejuvenated, envisioned, challenged in my thinking about what's possible. And it's so hard in the financial industry when you're producing, when you're operating at a high level, to find people who can challenge your thinking. And it's that what you and Sean and the team at Triad have built is something really unique. That they're coming up on 30 years in this industry. I haven't seen anything like it and haven't experienced anything like it. So.
Well, thank you. I don't take those words lightly, Wayne. We really want to make that our standard. And I think the moment where you think you have it figured out, you're setting yourself up for a fall. So after every one of those experiences, as you know, we say we don't have events, we have experiences. What we do with the team, we do an after action review, and we say, what do we keep? What do we improve? What do we start? What do we stop? A lot of that. I mean, you've been a great pillar in the community. You were an early believer in the mission we were on. I know you live your life that way as well, you and May and your family. And you've been very kind to give us like real feedback. Hey, this was awesome. This hit the mark. Hey, have you ever thought about this? And you always do it in a super respectful, kind way. But I just think you can never stop listening as an entrepreneur. You got to keep the ears open and the ego low.
Well, and your team, your entire team, you do listen. I mean, we were in an event and we went to the final night, and it was our first event there. So we went to the final night. We don't really know everybody. Like, I recognize the names of people. You're probably a Triad home office person versus an advisor, but like nobody was wearing their name tags final night. So like I mentioned that to one of your team members and said, hey, might be helpful for those of us who are newer if the Triad home office folks like wore their names, so I could remember, oh, that's Lisa, oh, that's Brooke, oh, that's like, we know you and Sean, but next time we had an experience, we show up final night, and every Triad person that I recall was wearing a name tag. So it was a really small thing.
Yeah.
But you've created a community and a team that listens even to the small things and then acts on it. So, which is really
In
powerful.
leadership development, we call that listening fast. Brad, could you speak to like what goes into that? Because that's a decision. At some point, that's baked into the gumbo where we listen quickly, at least to the right voices, and move quickly on that. Is that something that you guys talk about just when you're brainstorming at retreats? Like, where does that come from?
I think it has to start with the vision of what you're trying to build. Obviously, we talk a lot about that internally at Triad, and then externally helping our Triad members, create their version of their visions. And I know you have a really powerful one, Wayne, that you're trying to live into as a firm. So Trent, to answer your question, there's a couple of thoughts that come to mind. We call it member obsession at Triad. So it starts with the end in mind. Kind of Covey's 7 habits is what problem are we trying to solve? And if we start with member obsession and listening, oftentimes our members will tell us, they'll literally say, here's where I need help. Here's what isn't working. Here's what's frustrating with, I've got to do 3 clicks to get here instead of 1. And so I think sometimes it's just the simple act of the intent to listen. Jordan on our team, we borrowed this idea from Amazon. And so he was, as he was leaving a prior life, before he got to Triad, he actually interviewed with Amazon. And Amazon, if you dive in deep, they have a very, very intentional and thorough onboarding or interview process. And one of the things that they did in the early days, they called it the empty chair. And if you even just like look at their business model, like go to their app, go to their website and look how stupid easy they've made it to order things from them. Like the 1-click buy, right?
Yeah.
And what they said is they had an empty chair in every conference room. I don't know if they still do, but they did in the early days. And that was the seat for the customer. And they said, if the customer was sitting there, what would they want? And so we actually have an empty chair in each of our conference rooms at Triad. And I think it works for the member obsession, but it also works for, would we be proud of the conversations that are occurring in this conference room behind closed doors if Wayne Wagner was sitting over there in the corner listening in? And so I think it almost keeps you on your best behavior. Because what I see a lot of times is companies have success, the ego starts to grow and they don't even realize it. And before long, they know better than the people that actually help build the business with them. And I believe it's an ego check for us of like, if we wouldn't say it with Wayne sitting in here, we shouldn't say it at all. And so it serves a couple purposes for us, but those are a couple things that come to mind.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. I've got a couple of areas I'd like to lead us, but before we do that, can we like go back like Kansas Farm Boy? Trips into finance somehow. Can you walk us through that? And one of the things I would really love to hear your mental evolution on, Brad, is like I grew up landscaping, cutting grass, put myself through high school and college doing that. And I had like working hard was never an issue.
Yeah.
But I would be the guy who was on the job site swinging a hammer doing construction, and the guys in the white hats, the educated people, the engineers, the architects, like from a blue collar perspective, the white hats don't know how to work hard. And so part of my evolution personally has been to evolve from working hard. You work hard wherever you are.
Yeah.
And in fact, you can really exhaust yourself physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, probably more in a white collar job than in a blue collar job. But that was an evolution for me. And I spent some years there kind of in the coal mines, hammering away, trying to think if I just work harder.
Yeah.
If I just do more physical labor, if I just work harder, that somehow I'll get the results that I want. When really what I needed, I really could have used a mentor to come alongside earlier in my life and say, hey, work smarter, not harder. And here's what's smart. You're still going to work hard. You're still going to sweat. You're going to sweat mentally, not physically. And so there had to be some of that evolution for you going from Kansas Farm Boy to where you are today and where you're headed tomorrow. Tell us a little bit about the origin story of Brad Johnson, and then maybe touch on some of that evolution if you could.
Yeah. Well, legit Kansas farm boy, 100%. My dad is still on the same farm that I grew up on, or grew up in. So he's what, 70? He'll be 74 this year.
Mm.
Um, and the lessons that I learned on the farm, it molded me. And Wayne, to your story on swinging the hammer, like also swinging the hammer. I was fixing fence in the summer. I was throwing what were called square bales, but they're actually rectangles.
Right. Yep.
And 60, 80 pounds. I remember throwing those from like the age of 12, hating it. In a stuffy hay barn where like dirt was getting stuck in your nose and you go to blow your nose and it's just a dirt ball. And
Yeah. Where were those N95 COVID masks back then? Right.
we didn't have them. We didn't have a whole lot of technology there, but what I would say, and I think I've seen a common theme with a lot of entrepreneurs that end up building great businesses, there is this underlying not afraid of hard work mentality. And not that you shouldn't do it smarter, to your point, as you start to grow and scale and build a team, but it's this kind of almost tested in the trenches, shared suffering sort of, just in your DNA where you're like, I'm not afraid to get after it. I know if something takes work, I'm willing to do it. And that was a lot of what I got on the farm. And I think that really served me in my journey. I went from there to playing college football and a lot of the similar grit. It's like, you're not getting on the field. I wasn't, I was a decent athlete, but I was not blessed with like 4.4 speed or like a 400-pound bench press, but I was blessed with the work ethic and the ability to know that I will do the work it takes, whether that's watching film, whether that's in the weight room. And so that carried through to football, which I did, had a great team, made the playoffs my senior year, ended up getting some accolades on my side. And from there, it was just kind of that same mentality that took me into the workforce. Worked at a now defunct company that you all have probably heard of, Payless Shoe Source.
Oh, wow.
So Topeka, Kansas was the headquarters for those that don't know. And so
Nice.
I went from Emporia, which was, so I grew up in Minneapolis, Kansas. So I'll share that because most people I didn't even know that existed.
That's a thing.
Place in Minnesota.
Wow.
There's actually a Minneapolis, Kansas, 2,000 people is the approximate population. And then went from there to Emporia, Kansas, which was much bigger, probably a town of 25, 30, 40,000. And then from there to Topeka with that first corporate job at Payless. And so my step into finance was driven by this natural curiosity, Wayne, where I think part of it was where I came from. Like, I remember a story from my childhood. I didn't grow up poor, but I would call it lower middle class, but I didn't really know it. I remember I was probably a second or third grader, and I was going through the breakfast line. And I don't know if you guys remember, like we had like a little plastic credit card with like a barcode, like that's what you would scan to, for your lunch money or whatever. And I remember I scanned it and it did like the denied sound, like dun, dun, like denied, and like a little red light came on. And I remember my buddy in third grade, Casey, was right behind me. And the lunch lady, or the breakfast lady in this case, goes, and she's like, oh, something's not working. So she pushes another button and then the green light goes on, approved. And she's like, oh, that was my fault. You're on reduced meals. And I remember as a third grader, number one, being embarrassed because my buddies heard it. But number two, realizing, oh, like we don't have very much money. Like my parents both worked really hard, and we didn't suffer. Like we had the nice clothes and everything, but I wasn't the kid walking around in Jordans. And I think a lot of that, like if I really look at my inner psychology, getting into finance, I think part of it was like, I'm going to figure out this financial system and how money works, and I'm not going to be rolling that way as I go into life. I'm going to make sure that I have an abundance of being able to provide for my family and my children. And so that's probably some inner psychology and what brought me into finance.
Mhm.
But basically, I was interviewing with Ed Jones, Ameriprise, the usual suspects, and I was about to quit my corporate job at Payless about 3 years in. My wife was teaching grade school, and I'd somehow convinced her, leaving a $60K a year job in 2007 in Kansas, which is pretty good living, to go 100% to commission was a good idea. And she somehow like supported me. So I wouldn't be here without the support of my wife, Sarah. And about that time, my now business partner, Sean Sparks, who is a college friend, he said, hey, there's this little brokerage company that's hiring. If you're going to quit your job anyway to be a financial advisor, you should come interview here. And that led to me being the 12th employee at a company called Advisors Excel, which was basically no one had heard of at the time. That became, before I left, the largest fixed and indexed annuity provider in the country. A $15, $20 billion RIA. And I was fortunate enough to be there on the ground floor, growing up with financial advisors, just scribbling notes the whole way, being curious, figuring it all out, and just growing with them and serving them, and just really blessed and fortunate for that path. So long story, but that's what kind of catches us up to where we are today.
How did you and where did you and Sarah meet? You said that in 2020 you're turning 40 and celebrating 15 years with her. That puts you 25 when you get married. Were you college sweethearts or
high school?
High school. There you go.
Yeah. My best friend in high school was dating her older sister, and so I went with him. She went to high school in a town like 30 minutes away from where I grew up, and I went to a basketball game with him to watch his girlfriend. Right. And his girlfriend had a younger sister, which happened to be Sarah, who was also playing basketball. And we met at the very romantic Pizza Hut in Salina, Kansas. And that was where it all started.
Good stuff.
So we actually dated for, I think, seven years before we got married. So we've been together a long time at this point.
So at some point in there, she was looking at her watch and going, I wish you'd get off his
champ.
Yeah. Well, we started dating when she was a freshman in high school. So there was a growing up process.
Okay, fair enough.
So
I'm curious, Brad, for you, some early mentors or sponsors that help you see yourself as a leader.
The first time in my life, I remember just thinking of leadership in general, was my senior year of high school football. And I've always been a guy that I see myself as just another human walking around this planet, right? And I don't care if you're, the president of some country or you're a homeless guy on a street corner. I think we're all humans. We're all flawed. We all have our issues. And I think people that separate based on status or money, I think that's kind of a skewed way to look at the world.
Yeah.
So like, I kind of just always that's how I carried myself. So I remember my senior year, and I was one of the better athletes on the team, and it was pregame football. And I was used to somebody else was giving the speech of hey guys, let's go out, let's get it. Here's what we're going to do. And I remember the very first game of my senior year, I'm in this circle, this huddle, and everybody turns and looks at me.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, I guess it's my speech to give. And I zero prep. I was it was like an awareness thing of I guess I have now stepped into leadership and I didn't realize that I had. And so I think an important lesson in life is leadership. As Simon Sinek said out at launch, it's influence. And it's, someone's looking to you and saying, how are we going to do this? How are you going to lead? Speaking of mentors, a mentor that has influenced me probably the most in life when it comes to business and marriage and just how to live your true authentic self is a guy named Michael Hyatt, who many on the huge podcaster, ran a publicly traded company. Thomas Nelson, one of the top book publishers in the country, published all of John Maxwell's books, Dave Ramsey's books. So just a really successful guy. And I remember he shared with me, leaders are calm and confident. And he's got all these little one-liners, you know, that great leaders have that they've picked up over the years. And I could do a full-on hour episode of just the influence he's had on me. But that started with a mastermind I was a part of back in 2015 with him. And now, fortunately, he's also in the Triad community. So Wayne's definitely had plenty of opportunities to connect with him. And he's been a great strategic partner to our community as well.
Yeah. You just mentioned something, the mastermind. So 2015 would have been roughly 10 years ago. That puts you at 34 years old, give or take.
34, 35. Yep. Right in there.
34, 35. And a mastermind with Michael Hyatt. That is, I'm thinking that's not a cheap commitment on your end. Like, you're writing a significant check at that point in your career, at that point in your life, to put yourself in a new context. Like, what possessed you to write that check? And, you know, talk about talking our spouses into going with us on the journey. How'd Sarah respond?
Hey, Sarah.
In that situation?
You know what it's funny you bring up Sarah on that note. Sarah has, I'm just trying to think if I can think of an exception to this, Wayne, because you asked. She has been a green light that never turned yellow or red in my life when it came to my own personal development. Now, with the only exception being if I traveled too much and it was a detriment to the family. Like if I got super jacked up and I'm like, hey, I'm going to this mastermind every single month. There's been a couple of those because I'm an Enneagram 7 and I love people and relationships. But she has never questioned, you know, me cutting a check to invest in myself. And that's been huge because as you know, Wayne, like, and I know your story of you and May and the books and all of that. Without a partner in life that supports you, that can really be tough to do. So how I got to writing a big check. I was really fortunate. The organization I mentioned before, if it was not for that group, I probably would not have dove into personal development to the level I had. And part of that is just sales in general, which I was cold calling 100 times a day, trying to get guys like you to pick up the phone when you're really busy and trying to get people off the phone as quick as possible.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you get into sales, I think personal development is a big piece of that. And so I started down this path and I read a book called The Richest Man in Babylon, which I'm sure you're both familiar with.
George S. Clayton.
Yeah, very short book, jam-packed with all kinds of wisdom. And there was a statement in there that the best investment you can make is in yourself, not in a bank, you know, drawing an interest rate, but actually investing into you as a human. And I looked at that point in my life, which was just before I cut this check to join the Michael Hyatt Mastermind. And I was like, I was kind of coasting off the coattails of what my business did, you know, like, hey, if they had a conference, obviously I attended it, but it was kind of, finance can be a little incestuous where it's all the same kind of recycled ideas. And I said, I think I need to get outside of this space. And I had been reading Michael Hyatt's blog at the time, which was one of the largest in the world. And he wrote on leadership and just personal development. And he had written a book called Platform, which is how to build your online platform, which had become a New York Times bestseller. So I went to, it was like a big conference. There's probably 300, 400, 500 people there. Bought the VIP ticket because I said, I want, if I'm going, I want to be as close as possible to the people that I want to connect with, which was Michael. And there was a guy named Stu McLaren, who's an awesome human, actually helped Michael build a lot of his platform online in the early days. And him and his wife, Amy, have a charity in Africa where they build schools. And so the very end of this conference, they said, hey, if you give this amount, we will basically, Michael, Stu, and actually Amy Porterfield was the other one who's a big name online. We'll do a private mastermind in Franklin, Tennessee, which is where Michael's at. And whoever gives this level is invited. I think it was 5,000, 5 or 10,000. And I just remember thinking in that moment, number one, I'd pay that amount of money for a day of their time anyway.
Mhm.
and it goes to a good cause. It's
Right.
like, what do I have to lose? This is like a no-brainer, right?
Right.
And so that was the first step, and it was an incredible day. And then going into the next year, I was like, I want to get a coach. And so I hit up Michael and I said, hey, do you do any private coaching? He said, at this time, I don't, but I'm considering doing some sort of a small group mastermind. And then just like a month or two later, he rolled out what he called the Inner Circle, which was that mastermind in 2015. And I think it was $15,000 or $20,000. But here I'll share this because the ROI on that 15 or 20,000 has been astronomical.
Mhm.
It was either the first or second session. I was talking through a business problem I had. I had guys like you, Wayne. I had a book of business of financial advisors all across the country. And guess what? You all are really hard to get to show up at the same place in the same time. I bet you'll find that surprising, right?
Herding
And
cats that are all hyped up on ADHD medication.
right, exactly. And so I had actually used Zoom because Michael, this was the early days of Zoom. Michael actually used it for that mastermind for some of our calls. And so I was trying to host a monthly Zoom call. And I said, hey, I invited Michael Hyatt onto the first one just to do like an hour learning session. And I had like 50% attendance. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense. I'm like, here's a guy that you'd have to pay probably 10 grand to have a mastermind with him. And I'm giving it to people for free and they're not showing up.
Mhm.
And so I shared this with Michael and he's like, have you ever thought about doing a podcast? Just record it and then upload it. And then they can listen on their own time, if they're working out, if they're on an airplane, whatever. And that was the birth of my previous podcast, The Elite Advisor Blueprint, which honestly, without that, I probably would not have left my prior gig. That really helped in my personal development, my growth, my network. And so, yeah, here we are today.
It created your separate brand and identity apart from the company you're working for too, right? So
yeah,
that's good.
If I could actually ask you about that, Brad, because I'm noticing here on LinkedIn, 13 and a half years at Advisors Excel and big deal position there, lots of authority, responsibility, but during COVID, no less, the summer of 2020, decide now's the time to start that new thing. But by the way, we might look back in the next 50 years and say that would be the hardest time to do what you and Sean have done. Walk us through a little bit of the mythology, then the genesis of Triad.
Yeah. Like I said, my wife has been a very kind soul. It was just kind of this itch that just it kept needing to be scratched. And it was probably my last 2 or 3 years there. And by the way, an incredible company, incredible people, still friends with many of them there. But really what COVID was a blessing to me in one way, and I know it was not a blessing to many, so I don't take away all the pain and suffering that many felt during that time period. But for me, what happened was the podcast was growing. I kind of had this itch of like, I feel like there's something more. I was seeing a lot in this industry of, as we talk about Triad, the red line of success, where it's more premium, more assets under management, and just burnout, the hedonistic treadmill. And I was like, I was making an insane, stupid amount of money, more than I ever thought I would make in a lifetime. And what I realized is that is not happiness. Because I was, as going into 2020, going into the year of COVID, I believe I counted, and I think it was 78 nights on my calendar that year I would have been away from my family, which I know there's others in this industry that travel a lot more, but that's a lot.
Sure it
and
is.
At the time I had let me think, I had a 10-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 5-year-old.
Yeah. Those are precious days too. When you miss those, you don't get them back.
Missing a lot of family dinners, missing sports games, and COVID hit. And then everybody worked from home, for at least 2, 3, 4 months. Yeah. And I remember like I'm upstairs in a spare bedroom. I'm doing exactly what we're doing right now. I'm having the time of my life. Yeah. I remember my wife, it was like 5 o'clock one day and I hear a knock on the door and I open it up and she's got a glass of red wine for me. And I'm like, this might be the best thing ever. I'm like, this is awesome. And I just remember like in that moment, as I actually had a time to stop and breathe, because had COVID not happened, I probably just would have stayed like doing what I did. Like I was making a great living. And I remember telling my kids, we have these little, Wayne, we were talking before we hit record, Chris and Melissa Smith, family brand. We hadn't actually done our true family brand at that point, but we had little sayings, what it meant to be a Johnson. Yeah. And one of the things I would tell all the kids at nighttime, I'm like, Johnsons do hard things. We get uncomfortable. And I remember like looking myself in the mirror and like, well, do we? Because I'm kind of just being complacent right now. I'm kind of not doing the hard thing I know in my heart and soul I need to do, but it's scary as hell. And I just remember like your children can teach you incredible lessons if you let them. And I remember just like I did this little mental exercise. I'm like, if I'm on my deathbed and my kids are looking at me, hopefully they're surrounding me and like, wow, how did dad live his life? And I remember just thinking in that moment, if I had stayed on the track I was on, like he told us to do hard things, but he kind of really didn't do that himself. And in that moment, I think the final decision was made where I'm like, it wasn't, should I do this? It was, I have to do this.
Wow. Yeah.
And but without that pause, it was like this perfect recipe. It was like podcast and giving me the confidence and growing the network and then having some time to actually think about what I wanted in life and then actually having the guts, to kind of jump off that cliff without a parachute. But it just kind of all stacked up. And that's, if I look back, that's kind of what led to it.
So I saw an interview this past week with the CEO of Nvidia, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but really, well-known guy today, especially given the rise and flying high of Nvidia stock. And he was asked, so knowing what you know now, what would you do differently when you started Nvidia? And his answer was, well, I probably wouldn't have started Nvidia, because if I knew then how hard it was going to be and how much it was going to take, and the curveballs that would come, I don't think I would have done it. Which is fascinating. It's a moment of clarity from a guy at the peak of his career with the peak of that company, at least thus far. So you're a few years in here with Triad. Let me ask you that question. What would you do differently? Would you do it?
I very much relate to that answer. Sean and I were having a serious heart-to-heart just a couple days ago. And I was asked, and this was the answer I gave, like, hey, what have you learned in the first 3 years of Triad? And one of the things I learned was it's a hell of a lot harder to be an entrepreneur than it is to coach entrepreneurs, because I was coaching entrepreneurs for like 15 years before this. So I'm just thinking, Wayne has this problem. He calls me up. I'm like the classroom professor. Well, I'm just like, well, just A plus B equals C. And then you go and you get in the real world. And I just remember one day I'm driving into the office and I'm getting bombarded with like personnel issues. And then I get to the office and like the printer's broken and then the network's down. And I'm like, just getting like kidney punches from all angles. And I'm like, this is hard. This is not the glorious like IG, stories of entrepreneurs that, I think get glorified. And real talk, Wayne, just because that's the way I like to keep it. There have been multiple nights where I've literally been like in tears, like just like exhausted, like Like there is not enough of me to go around. And then you get home and you're trying to actually be a husband and a dad after you just, just
laid out.
Yeah. Just 8 hours of just getting body blows. And, I want to make sure there's a happy ending of this story because I really love what I'm doing, but
bring it to the rainbows and unicorns. Let's go.
But I like real talk, like Sarah and I went out for a date night and it wasn't too long ago. And, we're sitting at a little hole in the wall Mexican joint and she just looks at me. She goes, "Are you okay?"
Good for her. That's awesome.
And I said, "No, I don't think I am. I think today, like, I'm kind of like, this sucks. Like, I want to go on a date with you, but right now, like, I just am like exhausted." And she's like, "Okay, we can just go home tonight." And I think as an entrepreneur, one of the things you have to realize is you're a human. You're not a machine. You can't just run. You have to have self-care. You have to have, and that means physically, that means mentally. My wife and I have had a couples therapy session for going on over 2 years. And like, I'm proud to say that. I think a lot of dudes out there are like, "Oh, I don't need therapy. I'll battle through it, rub some dirt on it." And it's like, no, you're a human with emotions and your own issues and your stuff to work through. And then guess what? Then try to be married to somebody and they've got their own stuff going on. And I just think like you got to work through your stuff. And once you do and you get it out there and you process it and you're working with a professional, it's sure as hell hard to lead a team if you can't lead yourself, And so I just think that's a part of it. And I've just gotten comfortable with that now. Like before that first year, Trent, I was fighting it. I was like, now I'm just like, this is just part of the game. Like you kind of like get calloused a little bit and you're like, okay, well, if there isn't a personnel problem today, there will be tomorrow. So I'm ready for it, And so
instead of being surprised, you're like, oh, there it is.
Yeah. It's like the Stoic philosophy is, here's my favorite cup. It's already fallen off the desk and broken. So I might as well appreciate it while it's here today. And so that's just kind of the way I look at it. And you love your team, you pour into your team, but you also know like people have emotions, people have a tough time getting along, and that's just part of the game you're playing.
Well, and what I'm hearing repeatedly in this story thus far, Brad, is the necessary, deeply desired and grateful for a partner who's a green light and supportive. I know for May and I, it's been the same thing, high school sweethearts. And in my darkest times, which there have been many, she would just sit me down and say, "What's the worst that can happen?" Well, the school that we're supporting could close. I could lose the business. We could lose the house. We could go bankrupt. I could be publicly marked as the guy who can't do anything that he says he can do, which, that will be embarrassing for me. I'll be publicly humiliated within our sphere. And she said, and it'll still be the two of us against the world. And we'll build it again faster.
It's awesome.
And I know it sounds like you and Sarah have built that resilience and that grit into your relationship over what's now a couple of decades. So,
yeah,
I would love to have Sarah and Aubrey on a podcast, by the way. That I think would be quite something.
I might just have to get out of the way on that one because they're both powerhouses. Well, I mean, it's funny you say that, Trent. They it was, let me think of the first one.
Was it the summer?
Was it Founders Retreat? Was it Tahoe? It was either Tahoe. Or it was
the summer at Tahoe. I know they had a 5-minute conversation with Sarah, and she was going into it. She was a little nervous, but also I was like, it's so needed in companies today.
Yeah. The better halves conversation.
Yeah, that's what. So Sarah and Aubrey, so my wife and Sean's wife, my business partner, they saw this need because there's a lot of spouses and significant others that are complete afterthoughts in our space. And Wayne, to your story, they are dealing with the effects, good and bad, of being married to entrepreneurs. And it's almost like they need their own support network. And so Sarah and Aubrey, Sarah was joking. She's like, "What do we call it?" And Sarah's like, "The better halves." And then it stuck. And so that is Triad's Better Halves, where they have really created a really cool thing. in our industry, mostly females, because it's mostly dudes that are the advisors, but a great mix of both. And yeah, it's pretty awesome.
I would go one step further, that there's almost a need for a subset within that, because when I meet an elite financial advisor who's on a second marriage or a third marriage, that person, that second spouse is walking into something that they probably don't know quite what they're getting. It's a little bit like the dog chasing the car and getting a hold of the bumper. Now you got the bumper, you're not quite sure what to do with it. And so I would almost think that the second spouses and or the advisors who are divorced, who they've lost that first spouse, those people, when they can continue to function at a really high level, there's, in my mind, there's almost a holy crap. My respect goes up, not down, because it's okay. You probably learned a lot through not getting that balance of business and life right, and that's why the marriage ended. But to be able to continue to function at that level without a supportive spouse, like, there's no way I'm here without May for all these years. There's just no way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. It's, yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things you don't really want to think about. It's like, what if? And it's, I'm fortunate. That was one of the things, like during COVID, that was another realization. I don't do it religiously every morning. I go through these seasons of doing a gratitude journal, and it's what are the 3 things I'm grateful for in the morning. And what I started writing during COVID is my family's good health. Because, Wayne, to your point, if I lost everything, the house gets foreclosed on, whatever, I'm, in a cardboard box on a street corner somewhere. If I've got my family and they're in good health, at the end of the day, life is good. The rest, you can always go make more money. But that stuff, it's like truly knowing, like, what creates happiness in life. To me, it's those relationships, and just who you pour into and surround yourself with. And, as Jim Rohn says, you're the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with. And, obviously your family, you select your spouse, you've got your kids, some of your family, it's who you got. And then you've got your chosen family, which is the people you surround yourself with. And I've just always really treasured those relationships. And I try to pour into them and surround myself with people that make me a better version of myself.
Yeah.
Could we go a little deeper there on the chosen side then? Because on your LinkedIn, you've got your profile picture, and then your banner shot is you and Sean Sparks. So if we've got Page and Plant, McCartney and Lennon, Jagger and Richards, and we've got Johnson Sparks. You guys went to college together. Is that where this started again?
So actually so Sean is an identical twin. His brother's name is Ryan. And so I actually went to college with his brother, Ryan.
Okay.
So one of my football teammates was roommates with Ryan, who was on the track team. And so I transferred to Emporia. I went to JUCO for my first 2 years of football and then transferred. And Ryan was one of the first guys I met once I got to Emporia. Great dude, just a great human, liked to have a good time. We drank some beers on the weekends. And so his brother Sean was going to K-State about an hour away. And he comes down one weekend. We all hit it off, hung out all through college, did some spring break trips, the typical college kid stuff, And I stayed in touch with both of them after I graduated. So made the leap to Payless. Well, Ryan joined Payless about a year later. We were both IT majors. So stayed in touch with him. Sean, in the meantime, let's just say his grades were a little lower than Ryan's and I's in college. And he maybe had more fun than we did. I don't know.
Got some bonus years.
Yeah. But so Sean was managing a Hollister after he graduated. And it's a serendipitous story how he got into finance. I won't tell the whole thing, but his dad was a State Farm agent. A guy came to collect a life insurance check because his grandpa passed away. And Sean's dad said, "Hey, you're in finance? My son's a finance major. He's looking for a job. He just graduated." That was how Sean actually got the interview. It was PBS, which was the first FMO. It was actually one of the first FMOs that or IMOs that Allianz, the insurance company, ever purchased, and it was in Topeka, Kansas. And so Sean looks at the job listing, it says telemarketer. And he calls his dad and he's like, Dad, you got me interviewing for a telemarketer job. I thought you said this was a job in finance. And
Thanks,
his dad, Terry's like, just do the interview.
Get in there. Yeah.
If you don't like it, you don't have to take the job. And so he got the job. Fun story. This was my first year of marriage. Sarah and I just moved into our starter home in Topeka. Sean's commuting an hour now every day back and forth from Manhattan to Topeka to his new job. And I'm like, damn, these bills are really expensive when you don't split them 4 ways with your roommates. And I'm like, Sean, we've got a spare bedroom. Do you want to just move in? And so Sean was our roommate in our first year of marriage for like 6 months. And then Sarah like kind of put the kibosh on that one. And, but so that was really, how I learned about the FMO space, because I would come home at night after my corporate job and Sean would be sitting on his bed reading a book. But keep in mind, this was not a reader. I mean, he was not like the studious type in college.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, dude, what are you reading? And he said, it's a cold calling book. I'm like, really? What's cold calling? Well, I've got to call these financial advisors. And if I get them on the phone and figure out where they need help, then I can get them to fly into Topeka so that they'll do business with me. And so that was my entry into even understanding what this business was. Fast forward, I leave Payless about 3 years later. Sean had left that company to go to Advisors Excel, and he was the 9th employee. I was the 12th. And he said, well, just come interview here. That was my entry into finance. And then, here we are today. So that was the origin story of kind of how that came to be.
So who made the decision first? I think it sounded like you made the decision to leave Advisors Excel and kind of burn the ships. What was that conversation with, again, a buddy who's still there and doing well, also rocking out? I mean, did it take much of a sale there, or was he kind of ready and it was more serendipity again?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is this is a very small industry, and the rumor mill of all of these master plans that I heard, I'd started like 7 different FMOs in the first month I was gone. And I'm like, this one's wild. I'm like, I got to start writing these down.
Yeah.
The truth is, a good friend, but we both had families. We're both doing really well for ourselves. It was very much 2 independent decisions. My decision mostly probably centered around the podcast, really, because I had built a fairly substantial podcast the prior show in finance. I, top 3 to 5 show, depending on downloads, reviews, all that. And what I realized is I was building that show for somebody else. And that's nothing, there's no shots fired there. That's just a reality. Like if you're working for another company when you're creating things. And I really fell in love with it. I'm a curious guy. I love to learn. I love relationships. I love people. So I'm like, I'm going to keep doing this. Selfishly, I'd do it if nobody listened, because I learned something on every interview,
I see that. Yeah.
And so that kind of took me down the path. There was some back and forth, and I really tried to stay for the last 2 to 3 years, and it just didn't work out. And completely okay. There's no like ill will there or anything. And so I'd really just decided it was time. Went through a 2 or 3 month process, left, and back to that hike we took. Really, I didn't know what I was like. I remember I was calling all my clients, friends for 10 or 15 years. They're like, what are you going to do? I'm like, I don't know. I go, I think I might go podcast for a year or 2. I was just going to kind of sort it out. I, saved up a war chest where I wasn't just going to like, not have any money to live off of or support the family. And it was kind of this weird, maybe COVID had something to do with, like, even looking back, I'm like, why did I do that? It was just like, I just kind of knew that it was time, And so the day after my 40th birthday was my last day. It was August 14th of 2020. And it was about a month later, Sean decided to leave Advisors Excel, and he took his own path. I mean, he'd written a book. Actually, fun fact, here's some free PR for Sean I was going to do. So his new book is getting ready.
There you go.
early release copy here.
Nice.
But so he had written a book called The Advisor Breakthrough, and like legit wrote it, spent a lot of money to do it. So I think he kind of had some of the same journey going on that I did, where he was a creator, he was super passionate about the business, and he was taking his own journey. And then he said, hey, I think it's time for me to go. And I honestly couldn't believe it. I was like, wow. Like, because I mean, I remember that hike in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains, like Sean's like, yeah, it's going to suck not having you there, but keep rolling. And it was kind of like, a farewell tour sort of deal. And when he left, I was like, wow. And the first thing I thought, we went to his house, and, small group of us celebrated and congratulated him that, it was for whatever was next. And then I said, hey, dude, this was too good of a run. We got to do a guys trip and celebrate. And so for some reason we picked Denver. I don't know why. It just seemed like a good road trip place. And so we loaded up, just him and I in the car. Which, by the way, if you want a fun road trip to Denver, do it in a Tesla. You stop every about 2.5 hours at some random middle of nowhere place. So that was our journey out there. And it wasn't too long into that car ride, we started talking. Hey, what's missing? What, because we both knew we were going to stay in finance. We didn't know what that would look like. We both love this business. We love personal growth. And the whole thought of like a small, more intimate community where you really got to know and of top performers, because that was one of the frustrations. Like, in the brokerage model, you work with everybody, and I don't want to work with everyone. In fact, most people, I look at it like, would you break bread? Would you have somebody to your family dinner table? And a lot of times I was doing that just because it was a transaction, and that didn't feel good. Back to do business, do life. I want to just surround myself with people I want to do life with. And if we can do business and we're all better because of it, that's a pretty cool formula. And so had an 8-hour road trip, talked a lot about it, spent a couple days in Denver, went out for a really nice steak dinner, had a couple nice bottles of wine. And by the time we were driving home, the whole idea of Triad, we didn't even know what it would be called. It wasn't called Triad, had kind of been formed. And so, pretty surreal looking back at it, how it came to be.
It's amazing, because even 15 months ago, Wayne is like kicking tires on Triad, not in yet. 15 months ago, right? And he's like, I'm not sure if it's time to leave. And there was financial reasons to not leave. In fact, I'll put it that way. That said, is one of the questions I asked that I think landed was, in 5 years, is this the place where you've wanted to have been that whole time? And he's like, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then within a month, he made the switch. He was over.
So Wayne, this isn't my podcast, but now I'm curious. What was it that, like, if you could break down, like, this is how or why I knew Triad was the next chapter for me? Why was that?
For me, it's being in a room with entrepreneurs who have a growth mindset. So look, I was with LPL Financial for 18 years, and I would go to their conferences, and I started with LPL when LPL was 1,700 advisors, and they were the biggest. Today they're eclipsing 25,000 advisors.
Wow.
And so I was there for 18 years of their massive growth. And as my production grew, as the business grew, as the revenue grew, as we helped more clients, they would put these little labels on you in terms of your club level. It was really a revenue measuring stick. And so you'd walk around the conferences and people would start looking to you or reaching out to you. And I've always, one of my own personal evolutions in terms of moving from working hard to working smart was being in those rooms and realizing that, like, I was always someone who I can learn something from everyone. Therefore, I'm in this room with a lot of people. Everybody here has something to teach me.
Yeah.
And then I would spend the entire conference in conversations where I wasn't learning anything because it was so hard to find the people who actually had leveled up and could teach me something. And so when I interacted with you and Sean and the Triad team, it was very evident very early on that this is a group that A, has a lot to teach me, B, they are attracting advisors who have a lot to teach me.
Mm.
And so hopefully I can be a positive contributor in this community, but very selfishly, very pragmatically, I can walk into this room and I know I'm going to learn versus I had gotten to a point where in virtually all the rooms I walked into, I wasn't learning very much. And so I was spending a lot of time working hard, but I wasn't working smart because I wasn't in a room where I could get fed and where I
Yeah.
could get poured into. And so that having a culture and having it, and then so that's the content piece of it. The culture piece of it is you're not in a room with everybody. Like you're not in a room full of fast food franchise owners who all own in the same town where
Yeah.
they're not sharing anything.
Yeah.
Right. So you walk into the community and the culture at Triad and everybody's like, well, here's how I'm doing it. Here's how I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Here's best practices for this. We found success with this. And it's a complete open book. And now, 50 plus, 60 plus practices, that room is so robust. And it's just boiling with content, boiling with ideas. And it's like now I go to an experience with Triad and it's okay, first of all, I better stretch because we're going to walk in here and the fire hydrant is going to be running and we're going to walk in front of the fire hydrant and start drinking. So I better be ready to learn. I better have prepared myself, almost, done a detox of whatever I need to detox for my body to physically, mentally, emotionally prepare myself to be in that room. But that cultural content and culture and the content brought together. And then for me, the decision on the timing was actually my team's. So I'm trying to build a team that's making decisions about the business apart from me. So we work on the innovator integrator model.
Yeah.
And integration under our operations guy, Mark Powers. So I am the creator. I'm the innovator. I'm the guy who's running through walls. The team has to support me. And so I you guys have been generous and have been in allowing our team to be involved in some calls and meetings and stuff. And I went to the team and I laid out really the next 2 years. And I said, I've got this going on, this going on, this going on, this going on. A move is probably going to have to take place either January of 23 or probably not until mid 24. And so, when we lay out the next 2 to 4 years of planning and strategic thinking, those are the 2 time slots I could see us making this change. You guys choose if A, is it the right move? B, when does it happen?
Yeah.
And unanimously, very quickly, January 23 is when we need to go.
So. Thank you, team. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Glad. I will say that is a great leadership lesson, though. You just reminded me of a conversation I had with another financial advisor, a founder. And I remember he basically said, because he's been with his current group for a long time and they're just starting to explore us. And he said, man, I'm just like, I don't want to have to sell the team on the move. Mm-hmm. And I said, you shouldn't have to. You should invite them into the conversation and then you should listen to them.
Yeah.
And it was like, he's like, oh, I never thought about that. And I think as a founder and as a leader, sometimes you think this is, I've got to lead the charge and run the show. And the more I've learned myself with everything I've screwed up along the way, it's like, the more you hire great talent and get the hell out of the way and actually listen to them, the faster you're going to grow. Yeah. And so I think that's a great leadership lesson that you just shared, which is bring your team into the conversation and actually ask them questions and listen.
Yeah. Well, and I think on my side, the single biggest ongoing impediment to our growth as an organization is my inability to trust people to run the team, to do the work. And so we've taken, we've taken most of the major decisions out of my hands at this point. So Trent and Mark design the next job description and personality profile, including Enneagram score and CVI, profiles for what that ideal person is going to look like. And then they go out, they recruit, and I don't meet the person until it's like one of the final 2 or 3 who made the screens. And by that time, the entire team has met them. The entire team has said either one of these choices is appropriate. And Wayne, you get the final say. But the decision's already made. One of these people is going to work here. You just have to choose which one. And so it's starting to build against my deficiencies, and crucial to our ability to continue to go. The other thing that it does is it makes some other answers really easy, because when we made the move, I got a call from the owner of the old company, and I was offered personal coaching and a really big check to say, hey, no, psych, we're going to stay. And at that point, I was able to say to him, thank you so much. I'm really blessed by your very generous offer. But at the end of the day, it wasn't my decision. It was my team's decision. And that's not to dodge the responsibility, because it's still my team. It's still my decision. But at the end of the day, I'm building a team that makes these decisions. And if I undermine them, then I undermine the future of the organization. And so meanwhile, because I'm saying no to you, I can go back to them and get huge credibility improvement, huge leverage for moving forward, and say, hey, this is what I was offered to unring this bell. And I said no, because you guys said this is the right move. So that's how you end up building, almost, a forging together of your culture and the decision to move forward, where everybody's like, yes, this is the right move, and you get huge buy-in when you position it like that.
The phrase that you bring to mind is, if you help plan the battle, you don't battle the plan. And that's exactly what you did. There's alignment there from the whole team. It's like, this is the direction we're headed, unified.
Absolutely. Good stuff.
I'm a huge fan of companies like Triad, for example, that can actually deliver on what they're promoting. And Wayne, if I was to ask you, has wild expectations coming in, have they been met? Have they been exceeded? Are they below the line for you so far?
Wildly exceeded, continuing to get better ideas. We're better. And look, we're still a little bit of an oddity because our client profile is a little different. The structure of the team's a little different, that kind of stuff. But I get challenged at every interaction. And, Triad Triad puts more meetings on my schedule than I can make. But every time I'm able to engage, I get great input, and we go out and change how we're doing things or how we're thinking about things because of those interactions. So,
well, Wayne, I love that you're doing a podcast. So I know we talked, and just knowing your personality, and you're a student, you're a reader, you're a very deep thinker, and you're curious. And I was like, dude, you have to do a podcast. So I love that you just ran with it, and you're an implementer. That's the other thing. You don't just sit on ideas, you actually put them into action. So I'm just fortunate to be on this conversation, because you actually took an idea, ran with it. And I can't wait to see what this show does for, retirees out there, pharma executives out there, because I know you work with a lot of them. That's kind of your niche that you've really done a lot of awesome work in. And so I'm just excited that you're putting these conversations out on the internet.
Yeah. Well, we're grateful, because Brad, so much of what we're doing this is the Envizion More podcast. And so what we're constantly doing is trying to help our clients and help our community think bigger. Not think about retirement as a number, but think about retirement as a step on the journey. So if you move from your working years into your non-working years, what are you going to do? Why are you going to do it? Who are you going to do it for? You guys had Triad at the last experience at launch had Arthur Brooks come in. And that, I've now listened to his book, and, we've had some great conversations among the team with my family about this whole idea of happiness. And, the ironic thing is that in that book, he could just about be preaching out of, the book of Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament, where he's talking about, well, what is happiness? Happiness is having something to do with people you care about, for people you love, and doing that in the context of a relationship with the Almighty. And that ultimately is what financial planning so frequently is just this discussion about, hey, do you have enough to quit? As though once you cross that line, well, it's immoral for you to keep working, or it doesn't make any sense for you to keep working. Well, but what if you love what you do? What if you care about the people you're doing it with? In pharma, what if you're saving lives every single day with the medicines you create and put into the hands of patients? Like, what is the long-term generational impact that you're creating? And you would quickly rob the world of that because a financial planner said, well, you've got enough to quit, so you have a moral obligation to quit. Well, that's nuts.
Yeah.
So, it's, and I know that you guys you're on your own journey now of envisioning more. And I know our time's getting long here. So let me ask a final question. In your mind, Brad, what does Envision More mean to you?
There's a few places my mind goes. The first one, like Envision More, I think there's some interesting ways to look through that around money and happiness. And we've touched all over this, during this conversation, but one of my favorite kind of mental models is rich, like being rich or being wealthy. There's two different definitions. It's getting everything you want, or it's wanting everything you have. Mm-hmm. And I think in my early journey in life, it was getting everything you want, because small town farm kid, didn't come from much. It was all those monetary things that I always desired and never got: the nice car, the nice shoes, the nice clothes. And what I realized as I started to make an income where I could purchase all of that, everything I wanted, for the most part, I was not living on a budget. And I was surrounded by a lot of people that had also come up and were doing really well for themselves. And I saw that did not create happiness. In fact, I saw oftentimes it made more of the underlying issues worse. Yeah. More drinking, more infidelities, more, fortunately not for me, but many of the people that I saw go down that path, it created more of stuff that they actually didn't treat them very well on their journey in life. And so hopefully the older and wiser I've gotten, I've just tried to zoom out and look at what really does make me happy. And back to what I'm doing on a daily basis, I'm doing it with an incredible community of people. We were talking before we hit record here, two guys, two incredibly successful advisors, Tyler and Andrew. I just did an episode on my show with them. And the first 25 minutes, we were talking about life stuff. We were talking about how they had got on this, treadmill of success, as we call it in our industry, but they didn't even know what significance was, what building a business bigger than them was, because they'd never been exposed to the idea of it. And I will say, hearing them give Triad credit, and by the way, I gave the credit right back to them, because there's many people that are exposed to ideas that don't do anything with them. But they were very gracious, just like you've been, Wayne, on this conversation, and gave us credit. And those conversations are so fulfilling to me. If Triad can be any sort of a little influence on helping great advisors become even better business owners, so that they can help more people out there and do it at a better, higher level, that's pretty noble work to me. Yeah. And happiness for me, back to the family, my definition of envisioning more is happiness is not wanting to be anywhere else other than where I am in that moment. And that's one of the things is I've had to grow and mature, because I'm very much Enneagram 7 is very futuristic. What's the next fun thing? Sometimes we're so focused on the next fun thing, we forget to be in the fun thing or the moment that we're in. And I wear this actually right here. It's a little stoic thing. It says memento mori. Essentially, you could leave life right now. And I try to remind myself, none of us have any guarantees in this life. And I just try to be like, in those moments, I'm very imperfect at this. Ask my wife, she'll tell you. But in those moments, I want to surround myself with people that I want to be around. And then I want to be in that moment and not want to be anywhere else. And I try to do as much of that as possible in my life, in both business and life, and not have a separation, but have an integration. And I've found the more that I stay true to that, the happier I am. So that's kind of my take on that.
That's great. Thanks so much for sharing with us today, Brad. And Trent, thank you again for being with us and co-hosting and keeping us on track. This has been another episode of Envizion More. Join us again next week.
Thanks, guys. That was fun. You guys are a good 1-2 combo.
Thank you.
Good.
How many episodes have you guys done together?
Half dozen-ish, 7-ish.
Yeah, 6 or 7.
It won't be on the podcast, but the Mac Orland quote: "When you have a taste for exceptional people, you always end up meeting them everywhere." That might have been written for you, Brad. What a great life that you're crafting here, my brother.
Thanks. And guys, it's stuff. I enjoy all our conversations. Trent, I don't get to see you near as much as I get to see Wayne, but I always enjoy the conversations when we do. So I would say 100%, like, especially on those solo episodes, Wayne, like, that's a good combo where Trent can kind of pull that wisdom out of you. Yeah. And you, I mean, only 5-6 episodes in, you guys have a really good cadence. Like, you seem like you've been doing it a lot longer than 6 episodes. So I'd say stay at it.
Appreciate that. We're hoping our 20th will be better than our 6th, but
wait till you get to your 100th. You're gonna be
about it.
Yeah.
I'd love to have you and Sarah come back and talk about your journey a little bit. Specifically, I know that we talk when Arthur Brooks talks about happiness, he talks about serving others as being such an important part of that. And I know that she's doing that in the Better Halves model within Triad, but I know she's also doing some work that kind of intersects with some work we're doing in the area of foster care, because she does foster child advocacy work within the court systems, like, if I understood correctly, right?
Awesome. Yeah, there's the organization.
Yeah. So
she would love that. And we've never done a podcast together. I think it would be really fun. If we go together, you should bring May on too, and that could be a really fun combo.
That would be fun. That's great. Good stuff. Well, we're scheduled with Chris and Melissa Smith in a few weeks too, to get them talking about Family Brand Live. And then May and I I don't know if we're scheduled yet, but we're getting scheduled to go on Family Brand podcast with them as well. So it's good stuff.
They're great. I don't know how much of their podcast you listen to, but it's the same thing you get when you see Chris and Melissa in person. They're just so authentic. So you'll have a good time on there. Yeah,
absolutely. Good stuff. Thanks so much. Appreciate you, Brad.
Happy Friday, guys. Have a great weekend. See you.
See you.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Envizion More podcast with Wayne Wagner Jr. of Visionary Wealth Management. We hope you were encouraged and inspired by the conversation today. If you want to dig deeper into the show notes or Wayne's work at Visionary, you can find us at envisionmore.com. That's Envision with a Z. Advisory services are provided through Wealth Plan Investment Management. Wealth Plan Investment Management and Visionary Wealth Management are separate entities. The content is developed from sources believed to be providing accurate information. The information in this material is not intended as tax or legal advice. Please consult legal or tax professionals for specific information regarding your individual situation. The opinions and material provided are for general information and should not be considered a solicitation for the purchase or sale of any security. Thanks for listening.